Today I wanted to bring you a story of Moses when he was a child that I think a lot of you have never heard before, and I hope that you enjoy it. Before I start into the so-called untold story of Moses, I thought I would quote a couple interesting things from the Bible and from the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. So in Joshua 10:13, we read, "And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves from their enemies, or of their enemies. Is this not written in the Book of Jasher?" The Bible refers to the Book of Jasher in a few places, and we have that book today. Now, whether it's the exact same Book of Jasher, we don't know. Whether it has errors in it, I'm sure there are. But it's very interesting because the same Book of Jasher, as far as I understand it, that we have today, Joseph Smith also had access to, and this is what he said about that book. "Abel was slain for his righteousness, and how many more up to the flood is not much consequence to us now. But if we believe in present revelation, as published in the Times and Seasons last spring, Abraham, the prophet of the Lord, was laid upon an iron bedstead for slaughter. And the Book of Jasher, which has not been disproved as a bad author, says he was cast into the fire of the Chaldees. Moses, the man of God, who killed an Egyptian," or that doesn't matter. The quote really ends at the Book of Jasher, which has not been disproved as a bad author. So Joseph Smith doesn't exuberantly praise the book, but he doesn't say it's a bad, worthless book either. He's actually using a story that is found in the Book of Jasher. And so if it was good enough for Joseph Smith to use a story from it, I feel like it's good enough to at least go over it. And I always like to put things in a box. Things that I don't know if they're exactly true. Things that are interesting to me, I just put them in a box until I get more knowledge later. I might not ever get enough knowledge on the subject, but at least it's in that box. And if it's waiting there for me to find out more about it, or to have something else come along and confirm it. So I just keep it in that box, and I enjoy every ancient scripture and any bit of information I can get, and I pray and strive to know what is truth and what is error. And I try to focus mostly on the standard works, but it's fun to go and get some history, because the Book of Jasher really is mostly a history, and that's where this story of Moses is coming from, the Book of Jasher. So let's get into it. Jasher chapter 70. "And in the 3rd year from the birth of Moses, Pharaoh was sitting at a banquet, when Alperanith, the queen, was sitting at his right, and Bathia at his left. And the lad Moses was lying upon her bosom, and Balaam the son of Beor, which with his 2 sons, and all the princes of the kingdom, were sitting at table in the king's presence. And the lad stretched forth his hand upon the king's head, and took the crown from the king's head, and placed it on his own head. And when the king and princes saw the work which the boy had done, the king and princes were terrified, and one man to his neighbor expressed astonishment. And the king said unto the princes, who were before him at the table, What speak you, and what say you, O ye princes, in this matter? What is to be the judgment against the boy on account of this act? And Balaam the son of Beor the magician answered before the king and princes, and he said, Remember now, O my lord and king, the dream which thou didst dream many days since, and that which thy servant interpreted unto thee. And now therefore this is a child from the Hebrew children, in whom is the Spirit of God. And let not my lord the king imagine that this youngster did this thing without knowledge. For he is a Hebrew boy, and wisdom and understanding are with him, although he is yet a child, and with wisdom he has done this, and chosen unto himself the kingdom of Egypt. For this is the manner of all the Hebrews, to deceive kings and their nobles, and to do all these things cunningly, in order to make the kings of the earth and their men tremble. Surely thou knowest that Abraham their father acted thus, who deceived the army of Nimrod, king of Babel, and Abimelech, king of Gerar, and that he possessed himself of the land of the children of Heth and all the kingdoms of Canaan, and that he descended into Egypt and said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister, in order to mislead Egypt and her king. His son Isaac also did so when he went to Gerar and dwelt there, and his strength prevailed over the army of Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And he also thought of making the kingdom of the Philistines stumble, in saying Rebekah his wife was his sister. Jacob also dealt treacherously with his brother, and took from his hand his birthright and his blessing. And he went then to Paddan Aram, to the house of Laban his mother's brother, and cunningly obtained from him his daughter, his cattle, and all belonging to him, and fled away and returned to the land of Canaan to his father. His sons sold their brother Joseph, and went down into Egypt and became a slave, and was placed in the prison house for 12 years, until former Pharaoh dreamed dreams, and withdrew him from the prison house, and magnified him above all the princes in Egypt on account of his interpreting his dream to him. And when God caused a famine throughout the land, he sent forth and brought his father and all his brothers and the whole of his father's household, and supported them without price or reward, and bought the Egyptians for slaves. Now therefore, my lord, king, behold, this child has risen up in their stead in Egypt, to do according to their deeds, and to trifle with every king, prince, and judge. If it please the king, let us now spill his blood upon the ground, lest he grow up and take away the government from thy hand, and the hope of Egypt perish after he shall have reigned. And Balaam said to the king, let us moreover call for all the judges of Egypt and wise men thereof, and let us know if the judgment of death is due to this boy, as thou didst say, and then we will slay him. And Pharaoh sent and called for all the wise men of Egypt, and they came before the king, and an angel of the Lord came amongst them, and he was like one of the wise men of Egypt. And the king said to the wise men, surely you have heard what the Hebrew boy who is in the house has done, and thus has Balaam judged in the matter. Now judge you also, and see what is due to the boy. For the act he has committed. And the angel, who seemed like one of the wise men of Pharaoh, answered and said as follows, before all the wise men of Egypt and before the king of the princes, if it please the king, let the king send for men, who shall bring before him an onyx stone and a coal of fire, and place them before the child. And if the child shall stretch forth his hand and take the onyx stone, then shall we know that with wisdom has the youth done all that he has done, and we must slay him. But if he stretch forth his hand upon the coal, then we shall know that it was not with knowledge that he did this thing, and he shall live. And the thing seemed good in the eyes of the king and the princes, so the king did according to the word of the angel of the Lord. And the king ordered the onyx stone and the coal to be brought and placed before Moses. And they placed the boy before them, and the lad endeavored to stretch forth his hand to the onyx stone. But the angel of the Lord took his hand and placed it upon the coal, and the coal became extinguished in his hand. And he lifted it up and put it into his mouth, and burned part of his lips and part of his tongue, and he became heavy in mouth and tongue. And when the king and princes saw this, they knew that Moses had not acted with wisdom in taking off the crown from the king's head. So the king and princes refrained from slaying the child, and so Moses remained in Pharaoh's house, growing up, and the Lord was with him. Hope you enjoyed the story. I thought it was very interesting how it talked about angels and how they interact in our lives, or in Moses' life, to protect him and to preserve him and to do the will of the Lord. How he was saved, but that salvation came at a price, and that price was that his mouth was burnt, so that he's slow of speech later on in life. And now we know, why was Moses slow of speech? Well, if this story is true, it might be because he burnt up his mouth and tongue. And so we also get introduced to Balaam, who is later on recounted in the Bible as striving to curse Israel 3 times, but he can't, with the king of the Moabites. So, very interesting stuff. The Book of Jasher is really very interesting and gives a lot of interesting perspective. And I hope it's true, because a lot of the stories in there are very inspirational. And I think it's interesting that Joseph Smith mentioned it as not a bad author, and he was quoting a story from it. So, hope you enjoyed this video.